Good evening, everyone. So I will provide for you tonight an update of the problem resolution system complaint that we received several months ago regarding substandard space in our K-8 schools. Before we start, though, I'd like to provide you with an overview of what that process looks like when a complaint goes into the DESE's PRS department. Once the department receives a complaint, the department will send the district what's called a request for local report. And essentially what that is they will list the regulations that they believe, based on the allegations, that may not have been followed. Following that, the request for local report will always ask for a district's narrative, which is our opportunity to explain our practices and identify any areas that we believe are non-compliant and any corrective action steps that we've already taken. And then, of course, there's always requests for documentation. The district's report is called the local report, or the district's response, rather, is then submitted. That's step 2 with the narrative that's requested, along with requested documentation. And then, as I listed before, it can include any corrective actions that we have already taken. Following the review of the local report, DESE will then issue a letter of finding that essentially concludes, based on information provided by the district, what areas were compliant and what areas were found non-compliant. Where we are now with this particular PRS, case number 2325, is we have received this letter of finding, and there is a request for corrective action steps, which I will go through in subsequent slides. There may be, so we will submit what we will do to correct the areas that have been found to be non-compliant. If these are acceptable to the department, they will issue what's a closure letter, which then officially closes out the case. There may be some back and forth depending on how complex the issues are. The due date for this particular PRS is the end of the month. So I do envision that, given, and you'll find that the corrective action steps could involve some renovations to our buildings, that we won't see a closure letter anytime soon. Any questions about the process generally? Okay. So I just want to share with you overall, I know that the superintendent had shared with the committee the entire letter of finding, but just wanted to give the highlights here. There were two concerns, major concerns, listed in the letter of finding. The first one is equitable instructional space, and we were found to be non-compliant because we do provide services for students with disabilities in hallways in 2 of our buildings. And what DESE has said to us is that while, yes, you are providing the services that are listed on a student's IEP, these students are not receiving the same priority as students in general education with regard to access and use of appropriate instructional space. And then additionally, there is the concern about the separation and stigmatization of students being educated in a hallway. And of course, there are confidentiality concerns there too. The second concern, based on the complaint, was that our RISE program at Runkle is not providing access to the general education curriculum and participation in the life of the school. Sorry for that typo there. Here, based on extensive documentation sent to the department from my office, including an on-site visit in February and a quite lengthy interview with myself and Donna Finnegan, who is the vice principal and also former special educator at Runkle, they did find that the RISE program was compliant with regard to inclusionary practices. And in particular, they said that the RISE program does provide inclusion opportunities throughout the school day, and that the students are not in a substantially separate program where they do not leave the classroom, and they do have access to the life of the school. And in fact, a significant portion of their days are spent in the inclusion environment, and a lot of this was credited to the 1-to-1 ratio that we have for students leaving the RISE classrooms and into, so that they're well supported in the general education classrooms, which is important to note. What I will share with you next are the major corrective action steps required, demanded by DESE that the district must respond to. So they need us to immediately relocate special education students who are currently receiving services in hallways. The two schools where they have, and we have identified, are at Driscoll and at Lincoln. We then have to provide the list of schools where the students are receiving instruction in hallways, and then more importantly, what we're going to do about it. At Pierce, they did find that the Pierce Nurses Clinic does not have proper access into the bathroom there. It's not ADA compliant. For those of you who have been in the bathroom, the frame is just too narrow for access in for a student or any individual with a wheelchair or even mobility issues. So I'll present to the committee tonight also some corrective action steps that we can take that I would recommend that you strongly consider. So I'll start by site at Driscoll. I should mention actually before I begin is what you'll notice in Driscoll, Lincoln, and at Pierce is that the options are not plentiful. There are very few spaces where we can move these small groups without a domino effect. So I want to just stress that it's not ideal at all, which I'm sure you all are aware of. So currently there are 7 special educators at Driscoll who are utilizing hallway space in order to provide special education services. And the reason that is because of the classrooms that they have been assigned to are too small. And so there's overflow. And they're sharing, or I should say, or we have 2 special educators sharing one room. And so you may have 2 small groups, one has to go in the hallway and one stays in the room. And again, this is just due to lack of space and size of space. So I did get a chance to speak with the special education director, Emily Frank, who oversees Driscoll, along with Principal Susie Talukdar, for some possible solutions. And again, I just want to stress these are not ideal solutions, and we want to avoid encroaching upon space that others have been using, but we are left to these options currently. Is we could repurpose the Metco office, which I want to add that it is currently already being shared to store some equipment too. That's an option. We could utilize the BEEP classroom that is there when the BEEP students leave after 12 o'clock, 12:15 or so. Because the hallways are so wide at Driscoll, it's easy to pull a table and some chairs for overflow or for a quieter learning space, but one of the options is to actually build a room within the hallway for additional learning space. We could utilize extended day space. Again, not ideal, and I want to make sure, because I told her I would, that Dr. Tulukdar did stress that she wants to continue to support METCO, BEEP, and extended day at Driscoll. So she recognizes that she finds value in these programs being in the building, but then also recognizes that tug for space necessary for students with disabilities. And then we can continue to expand learning centers into the hallway. Any questions on Driscoll before I move to Lincoln? Yes.
I'm just a little confused. Isn't the problem that they're in the hallway?
So we would have to build walls to turn it into an actual room. So it would be an extension of the learning center.
I see.
Have you determined how many breakout spaces you need to fix the problem at Driscoll?
So that's
How
a
many
good
additional
question.
that don't exist today? However you do them, because will one do it, 2, 3?
Yeah, so I don't have the exact numbers because they're not all happening at the same time, so they could be shared. So we wouldn't need, I don't want to speak for Driscoll, but my guess is we wouldn't need 7 spaces for these 7 teachers.
And I guess if I could, just one other question. I probably should have sent it to you ahead of time. I didn't think about that. Our contract allows for some teachers to begin later and end later, where they could possibly do the special, I mean, this has been my pet peeve for a long time, to do special education after school so the kids can participate in their classes and get the extra help that they need after school or before, either way, and might help to solve some of the problem.
I could look into that. I'm not familiar with the contract piece, but I do wonder if DESE would say that that is not equitable, because then you're having students with disabilities come in outside of the school day when gen ed students don't have to. I know that's been.
But we're also allowing them then to participate fully in their general education, if these are 0.1 or 0.2 kids,
Sure.
to participate fully in their classes and get the extra help that they need. I don't know.
I think it's a reasonable question to ask. I am quite confident that the department would not sanction it as a resolution because it would continue the disparate treatment. The point of the department's finding is that we are not providing equitable access to spaces, and I think that it would be a fair sort of line that to require students, first of all, it would have to be agreed to as a part of an IEP
Right,
meeting,
that I realize.
and to require that longer day as a part of solution to space. I just don't think it would. I personally don't think it would fly as a resolution.
So I think that between you and Principal Talukdar and the special education director who supervises Driscoll, you need to perfect a space program for this change. In other words, 3 spaces, 4 spaces, 5 spaces. Do they all need to be the same minimum size, or could you have a couple of small ones and a couple of medium ones? Like you should be able to program the need quite specifically. There also may be requirements that they be distributed through the school. Can they all, they not be really remote because it would take too long for kids to get there? What you need and where you need it, and what the, as a minimum,
Sure.
and maybe even a range. Because I don't think that you can choose between some of these rather difficult options until you know what compliance looks like in terms of magicking up new spaces, because we know what we're about here. This is the fact that we put 1,599 more kids into the same buildings, right? It's that we've used up all the space. There is no more space, and so it's very difficult before you even get to the price tag for this, and especially if it's going to happen this summer. So then the other question I have, which you don't have to answer now, is sort of what's the run of show? Is Matt in charge of delivering this? Matt and Charlie, exactly how's it going to get to happen? Yeah, go ahead.
I would say that to the first point, that's the exact work that Ms. Nomiller is doing. This presentation is designed so the committee understands the challenge, which is very clear. This isn't the solution.
Right.
This is the challenge of these are the only options. Whatever the configuration is or the solution is for Driscoll, the solution comes at some configuration of these 5 options.
All right.
The second for the run of show we'll speak to when we get to Pierce.
Yes.
I'm having a little trouble visualizing the solutions of sectioning a room out of the 3rd floor hallway and expand the current learning center into the hallway. I'm having trouble just imagining what that room would look like. There wouldn't be windows. And it would also cut into the hallway, which could get into a fire compliancy.
Sure, and we would look into
Yeah.
all of those. That was something that one of the special ed teachers had suggested, because he works in conjunction with his paraprofessional back and forth, and thought if we could build some walls and, maybe, again, we would be looking into this with Charlie Simmons.
I mean,
And
possible walls divided a larger, because you said you have, in some classrooms, you have 2 groups going. It seems to me that would be a better solution at some point.
Let's let them come back with a
Okay.
plan. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
Yeah, I'm happy to come back
struggling
once
a
we
little.
have final plans. There's a lot of
Okay.
question marks still, but we certainly have already some ideas in terms of where to put things and what to create.
All right. Pierce.
Mr.
Oh,
Glover?
yeah, Mr. Glover.
Very briefly, and it certainly shouldn't drive any decision necessarily, but the fact that we're tearing down the building in a few years should be taken into consideration in terms of what it is that we're doing.
Thank you. So Lincoln, currently there is one small group that meets on the 3rd floor in a hallway for special education services. And this is where you can see really the domino effect after speaking with Principal Denizio today. So what we could do is take so the first 2 bullets here list taking essentially specialist and service provider office spaces and turning them into learning spaces. Then you have to think about where they keep their equipment. So AAC is assistive technology, it's alternative and augmentative communication, ECS offices, so it's thinking about where they put their equipment, and at least for the AAC specialist, her confidential files could be relocated to the ETF's office potentially. So there are options there, but again, you would have staff without office space. But the one thing that Principal Denizio and I discussed is potentially taking the computer lab, which is currently used to deliver social studies in an extended day in the afternoon, and turn that into 2 learning centers. What that would mean then is the multi-purpose room, which the physical therapist and adaptive phys ed teachers are currently using to serve as students, would have to move. So the multi-purpose room would then be a middle school social studies classroom. Physical therapy could be delivered in the auditorium and in one of the 2 new learning centers. Again, not ideal, but that is an option that the principal suggested. There's also a bathroom next to the ETF's office, which we could look to repurposing into a learning center space.
So we
I know.
really don't want to do that. Two questions. My first question is, or clarification, which perhaps the former Lincoln School principal might answer, is that when you say that the first thing current special educator uses is 3rd floor hallway for small group instruction. That's what we're trying to fix. We're not going to educate kids just sitting out in the hallway. But didn't we already bubble out some spaces for this specific purpose in the hallways? We've already done what we were discussing at Driscoll of building pods in the hallways, making the hallways difficult, right?
Yes, and
You
they're
already have
all
those,
yes, and
they're
they're
not
all
enough, and there's
fully
ex-
utilized.
And so then there's even more. Or there's no room to build more pods, even though we don't like them. Right. So here's my second sort of thought, and it comes from some reading I did 4 months ago, in which I pulled out the town's recently completed strategic asset plan. And when Newbury came up, I went to the strategic asset plan and read it cover to cover to see what it said about Newbury, or the large parcel study, or whatever, these documents that were just done. And what was interesting about the study that looked at what to do with in terms of the town's strategic assets is that I came away from it reading 2 high-level recommendations or takeaways, and they were at opposite ends of the spectrum. One of them was that the town is shy by 12 athletic fields, which would just like knock me flat, that we need 6 rectangular fields and 6 baseball fields in order to have what our capacity we need. And obviously we don't have any place to put that. But then at the very other end of the spectrum, like pages and pages of this report, we're talking about all of the space that we could mine in our facilities if we could just convert or otherwise get rid of all of the file cabinets and paper storage. It spent pages and pages and pages of talking about document storage and how there was space to be found. So I would suggest that in each of these buildings you look hard at all, corner to corner, top to bottom, any place stuff is being stored, and find out how often it is accessed. Because if it's frequently accessed by educators, then it probably needs to stay where it is. But if it's not frequently accessed, then let's rent a pod or a trailer and park it in back of the school. I mean, this is fast and furious, right? We can get an easily accessible, with a door and a lock, a metal storage trailer that's weatherproof, park it outside the school, and just vacate those boxes, and then we don't have to do some of these more extreme things. Anyway, look at storage.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So the nurses' clinic at Pierce, I explained the issue that the bathroom is just too small and it's not ADA compliant. I did get a chance to review what the coordinator of nursing services, Tricia Laham, I did speak with Superintendent Bott and also Matt Gillis about this, and have reviewed what Charlie has put out too in terms of options. And there are different options out there, but they all are around renovating the space. Either we break into the current principal's office to create space, or utilize the conference room, but it all involves installing a bathroom with the right cabinetry and sink and shelf so that we can actually treat students, but also provide the partitions, the sort of tracking for curtains and other ways to block off for student privacy. And I know I have Matt here luckily tonight also to speak to some of that, because he has that institutional history too in terms of what the plans are, and Superintendent Bott can speak a little bit to the cost of this that has been predicted, and where the funding sources could come from.
Before I speak to the cost, could you just share with the committee, there were other findings at Pierce relative to Pierce Historic and learning in the hallways, so could you speak to that? Because I think that there's the solution, office space already exists, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's an easily solvable finding.
Can you remind me? I'm blanking.
So I believe that there was a note that there was learning taking place in the hallways of Pierce Historic, and that the special director, Ms. Frank, worked out with Principal Ryan Miller that there is existing office space in Pierce Historic, so that that can be. It was general education services, but for students who were struggling. So it was noted as not a special education finding. I think the important thing there is that there is a solution, so that I think the concern is that we also don't want intervention for students who are struggling. If it's a space that has been deemed an inadequate space for a student with disabilities, it's an inadequate space for any student. So there are some challenges with Pierce Historic, but we're able to move them around. I think that and I put Ms. No Miller on the spot. I believe I had that conversation with Ms. Ryan Miller, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. I was looking through the lens of
Yeah.
special ed, because that's what
Yeah.
they had. But yes, there are intervention services that are being delivered in the hallways. So there's some space to be mined with regard to instructional groupings that are happening in the hallways.
I think, as Ms. No Miller said, with respect to the bathroom, Mr. Simmons' preferred solution is a $500,000 to $750,000 solution. That said, given Mr. Glover's, and it's worth noting that the plumbing moves in Pierce and that part of the building are incredibly hard because of the poured concrete flooring. Mr. Simmons has a $150,000 solution that requires repurposing a conference room and 2 bathrooms into one. He believes that it is a good solution. He can fund $54,000 of that beginning July 1 with ADA money the town will receive. And will work with us to figure out the other $100,000. It's important to note that some of that will likely come from mini CIP items that he had planned, and so it would defer work in other places, in other schools, in order to meet the ADA compliance. But the fact is, we have to, even though Pierce will likely be massively renovated, we have to solve this one. We don't have a choice. So Mr. Simmons does believe he can do it this summer, and he believes he can do it for approximately $150,000.
So is there any pushback on the department? They know that we're partnering with MSBA. They know we plan on a renovation that would trigger ADA. To the best of my knowledge, I assume there's no child at Pierce who's in a wheelchair presently. I mean, yes, there could be tomorrow, but we also have buffer zones that we could use. Is there any way of working with the department on this one? I mean, I hate to throw out I know you do too,
Yeah.
to throw out $150,000 on a building that we're going to take down.
I believe with the
Or,
nurses.
or renovate totally so that it would be.
I believe with respect to the nurse's office, we don't have flexibility. I think that the department has given us a lot of flexibility with the rest of the building. B Wing has zero accessibility.
Oh, yeah.
The bathrooms in A Wing are completely inaccessible. The railings don't meet current code. And we've had to modify based on accessibility requirements. So I think that the department's giving us a lot of leeway with many parts of the building. I think with respect to the nurse's office, we just simply, because of the sheer small size of the bathroom, it's
I've seen it. I know.
It's a tight squeeze for a third grader. And so, it's hard for our nurses to even support a student in the bathroom. So I don't believe that we have, especially given the sort of the time, if the building were coming down in a year, or renovation was starting in a year, I think that there might be some flexibility, but I believe given the timeline of several years, we don't.
Right.
Certainly can ask to confirm that.
I think it doesn't
but-
hurt to ask the question.
So I did file an additional report to the department explaining that we have a number of building projects happening. They did ask me to include completion dates. So while they recognized and applauded us for our efforts in terms of expanding our schools, I think at the end of the day they said it's great, but it won't happen anytime soon. What are you doing now for those students who are learning in the hallways?
Yeah, no, that part I get more because those are, well, Driscoll is also one we're renovating, but I just would try and push back a little bit more
I can certainly do that.
because I mean, they should understand that too, that it's hard to spend that kind of money on something that, where we really need that money for other things.
Well, I would say if the principal, the health director, the special ed director, the nurse at Pierce all say this is not, we don't need this now. I mean, I wouldn't go to the district to DESE to the department for relief if the people that deliver the nursing services and the special services feel that this should be done. I don't think we need.
I would say that
here.
I would say that there is complete consensus from everyone you just listed that it in fact is a necessary modification.
So anyway, as one school committee member, I respect your opinion. As one school committee member, that's what I need to hear, and then I would say, yeah, let's make it happen.
Thank you.
So the plan is to come back to the committee as Ms. Miller finalizes plans before the end of the month. So I believe it's the 25th is the next school committee meeting with concrete plans. And I will say that there were other questions that were raised, and I want to thank Ms. Miller, Ms. Frank, Ms. Mall, and our principals for working through the questions. There were questions raised at Baker. And as challenging as spaces is at Baker, those have been able to be resolved, and questions at Heath. The Heath solutions are tenuous on our continued ability to be able to use the inaccessible classrooms above the gym that used to be locker rooms, and the office spaces up there. For now, we can use those, but that potentially is a challenge at some point in the future. But I just want to thank Ms. Miller and the team for resolving the questions at multiple schools, and the ones that you heard tonight, Lincoln, Pierce, and Driscoll, are the most complex and will require the sort of the greatest movement, sharing of spaces. As you said, I think one of the sort of more creative ways, if the schedules support it, are utilizing the early childhood classroom after dismissal for services. I think that accomplishes Mr. Glover's sort of concern of let's not spend too much money when the building will be torn down in 3 years, but let's resolve it. So I just want to, I've said it 3 times, but thank you, Casey, for taking on a really challenging and complex task to figure out solutions.
Yes, thank you.